Hey everyone, welcome back to Crypto Cash. Thank you so much again for joining me here. I hope you're having a phenomenal day. Wow, we got an interesting one here. We got a pretty significant delta here for the order blocks, basically a significant amount of sell orders versus buy orders. That's as of the recording, of course. Keep that in mind, that can change. But we do have some fair value gaps that we want to talk about too, and some dominance scenarios here, kind of an imbalance there, and obviously where the liquidation is at here locally. So we got a pretty important one today. Be sure to stick around. Let's take a closer look. All right, folks, before we jump into the back-end data here, I want to double check something really quick here, just kind of get your thoughts on what you're thinking here with Bitcoin, how much higher we're going to go. So according to Crypto YouTube, we can see over 73% of you feel we're going to see 128, 130, or 135. Now, those numbers are fairly random, but they're also pretty consistent with Fibonacci retracement levels. So we'll go ahead and talk about extension levels, how to kind of understand where the price may go next based on that, but also understanding too that they're predictive indicators and there's no guarantee we're going to even hit those levels. All that being said, though, taking a look here first, kind of just get a baseline on the CME futures, we can see that there is a small gap that was formed here for Bitcoin at about 124,000. Or between 123.5 and 123.7. It's a pretty small number, doesn't really matter too much. And then Solana's has been filled already, right? So long story short, there's really nothing to talk about regarding CME futures here at this point. No specific incentive or large gap, minus the $110,000 gap for Bitcoin way below the price. That being said, if we take a look here, we can see there's a significant buy order at about 122,700 for Bitcoin. So there's a nice little buy wall there. And as far as selling is concerned, we can see 125.8 to 125.5 is that local resistance shelf. So a lot of folks are basically trying to sell at all-time high. That's basically what we're looking at there. Now, when we look here at this, there's a pretty significant imbalance here where we're starting to see stablecoin drop. Okay, and typically when you see stablecoin drop and Bitcoin dominance go sideways, it's usually a very, very good sign for altcoins. So bottom right here is the altcoin dominance, kind of basically excluding the top three here and letting us know that just altcoins alone are looking very strong. Okay, so this is a good sign. This actually shifted a lot since yesterday morning. We can see a pretty significant pump on Sunday night, followed by a continuation likelihood of further upside here today. So the long story short there is I wouldn't recommend shorting today. And I would highly recommend securing profits if you do. So for example, let me just give you a prime example here. So in our premium group yesterday, we took an AVAX short, hit 26%, got in and out within about an hour. And the recommendation there is once we secure profits, the trade generally becomes invalidated. As you can see, we got in at $30 and got out at $29.60, kept it really nice and tight with a quick little 20x short play. All right. Now, the reason why that worked out is because it was a quick in and out. It wasn't just a hold on for dear life to the downside. Like you don't short anything to the metaphorical ground floor right now. Right. If anything, you're going to be holding long positions open for extended periods of time, and shorts are to be held for brief periods of time. Okay. So just kind of some friendly advice. That's how kind of where we're at. Secure profits when you can. On a short, if you're going to insist, and on the long, you can leave a little bit more open for longer periods because altcoin dominance once more is looking very strong. We'll take a look at altcoin dominance here in a minute, but I just want to kind of touch on the last 24 hours here. We can see a significant imbalance here. In other words, we got 126,400 as that highest point here locally, where we may see a pump up to 126.5. Now that's just based on local liquidation here in the last 24 hours. When we look at the 7-day time frame, we can recognize it's pretty similar in a lot of ways. A very significant chunk at about 126.5. So that's probably the likely next target area for the price action if it were to continue higher. All right, looking at the last 30 days, as per usual, we've already identified there's way more liquidation on the downside than the upside, but as per usual, 126.5 is that consistent number. We can see that reflected here as well. There's a pretty big chunk here at 125.2 that's already been swept, if I'm not mistaken. Let me refresh this here and quickly double check, see if there's anything else here locally. Yeah, that has been hit, and there's just a little bit of liquidation above the price. So the next target is 126.5. We're seeing that on all different charts. Now, we look at liquidation here itself. Ethereum is essentially more liquidations for shorts than longs. I talked about how bullish Ethereum is looking. Granted, most coins are pretty bullish here today, but Ethereum really hit hard. It punched right straight through that point of control, that local point of control, rather, with that larger area of interest. And if we look at the big picture here, once more, you don't try to bet against this. High ETF net inflow, significant continuation potential higher. Okay, so So there's a great chance we see the price continue further up here for Bitcoin. And if that happens, altcoins, as long as Bitcoin dominance remains the same, consistent in its current range, then we're going to be looking at further upside here for altcoins too. And we can see that reflected here with altcoin season index. We can see once more we're back up over that $1.7 trillion market cap for altcoins. These are the top 100 coins over the last 90 days. As you can see, outperforming versus Bitcoin for the most part. Majority of them are doing very well. Minus meme coins, honestly. Meme coins are looking pretty pathetic right now. So all that being said, let's look at the backend data, kind of see where we're at, and double check some important stuff here. So starting off with just the liquidation heat map, we can kind of recognize, as per usual, we're seeing more liquidation on the downside than the upside, of course, but it's starting to pile up here. So as you approach all-time high territory, it can be very risky business. I do not like shorting all-time highs, even though they seem very obvious. There's this weird euphoric thing that happens once you break through an all-time high. The price just goes into price discovery, and things get really weird, right? So even though I feel like we're still in a double top from the weekly perspective, we talked about that previously, and the decent probability of price pulling back to secure a majority of profit, there's no doubt that the more people short, the more likely the price is to go crazy to the upside. So generally speaking, at this point, with a lot of bullish convergences, there's no reason to try to short the top here. If you do, low leverage, low position size, make sure you play it safe, but it's inherently really risky to short all-time high territory, even though it seems like a very easy thing to do. All that said, we don't see too much top traders here. They're pretty inactive, which kind of implies they're stay on the sidelines here. We can see whale traders are more active today, and of course, same thing as well for retail. So those are basically just indications of larger volume position sizing, increasing their position amount, and in turn, with that delta, the cumulative delta, that lets us know that further upside is higher because there's a lot of money flowing into larger position sizing. Okay, now that could also reflect shorts positions too, but when you look at all the open interest and the liquidation delta here being 20 billion almost at this point, in fact we can get a little refresh and double check, it is now at about 18 billion. That's quite a lot of money flowing in, and a lot more longs than shorts. Okay, so once more, you don't bet against that. The trend is up right now. That's generally the concept. So we can see some local areas of open interest here starting to form. We can see 120, 122.5, 123.5, and approximately 125 even. Okay, so those are areas of support. The price were to pull back, hypothetically, we'll see 123.5 and 122.5 as the next potential pivot point for us. And we look at liquidation here as well. Let's get a quick little refresh just to double check and make sure. This is the last 7 days worth of liquidation. We can see 126 is that huge chunk. It's a level just above our previous all-time high. That's a common place for the price action to get hit. Oftentimes you'll see local highs retested and just a little bit above. So I wouldn't be surprised we see 126 to 127 in this next little push. Specifically that 126.5, we see the most amount of confluence with liquidation there. Okay, so those are kind of what we're looking at there for the overall liquidation scenario. Okay, now the front end beta kind of tells us a different story, or more so just consistent rather with the bullish continuation potential. Once more, we looked at the 3-day and the seven-day timeframes yesterday, and they were both extremely bullish. The daily timeframe is no exception here. We're back up over 70 in the RSI, basically implying that you want to leave your long position open until that comes back down. We got money flow index right there with it, and if you look, it's a very similar scenario to the last time we had a pretty significant continuation higher as well. In other words, the price action, when we hit above 70 in the RSI, the price was at 108, and then once the price came back down on the RSI, the price was closer to the 120 range. So that hypothetically gives us the same amount of potential here now that we have this overextension, right? So hypothetically, we saw a 13% increase from before when the RSI passed over 70. Now at this point, hypothetically, and again, this is a very loose estimate, we could see somewhere in the range of 140 based on that based on a very similar continuation potential, right? So once more, just hypotheticals there, of course, but when you reach these overextension areas, the likelihood of continuation higher is dramatically higher. Okay, so I think 130 to 140 seems like a very practical place. Last thing we want to do here too, and I can kind of just show you the extension on Fibonacci retracement. There's two ways to do it. Some folks are not really sure how to do it, so I just kind of like to keep it simple with regular fib levels. You could take the previous time frame here, which isn't as accurate because it doesn't take into consideration the most recent extension. But the concept here is that you take the most recent high, the most recent low, and that'll give you the extension levels here of 130, 131, and 135. Okay, so those are kind of just some general areas there to consider. You could also double click on this guy that's already open for basically our local low to local high, and we can extend it out as well, and we can see roughly the similar scenarios there at 130, 133, and 136, right? So the consistency there is between 130 and 136 as a rough estimate, giving us the indication that we could go higher to that range, right? I think it's a distinct probability, but me personally, wanting to take a long right now, especially since we're at a massive overextension, is not really the safest play. The reason why is because you look here, we've hit a 9 on TD sequential where the price ran up to a 9, continued lower to another 9 here, turned around, hit about a 7 there for the 7-day overextension, and then back to a 9 here, and then what do you know, we're at an 8. So hypothetically, we have 24 more hours of continuation higher before the price decides to pull back. So while I don't want to lean towards the idea or the mindset of shorting, I think if we see one more overextension, there's a decent chance that may be worth considering a short, especially if it's in the 130 to 136 range. So I'd be more interested in a short at 130 to 136 than I would be at 125. Right, and some change. So those are just some thoughts there, some theoretical stuff, and just keep in mind, folks, trading isn't all about finding the best entry possible. It's mostly about your risk management and risk tolerance, right? So if you can trade more effectively, or at least, sorry, you will trade more effectively if you're not using too much risk, or perhaps you are minimizing that by adding to your position or averaging out of your position. There's different ways of doing it. The concept remains the same. Those who are more successful are going to have good risk tolerance. Okay, so try not to be one of those bozos that just FOMO everything in and just kind of go balls to the wall because somebody else on Twitter or Telegram or who God knows where they're just being super bullish. Because the truth is we're very, very bullish right now, but we're really getting close to a reversal, and it's important to recognize that too. So those are my thoughts. What are yours? Why don't you comment below before we take a look at the next series of altcoins? Quick heads up to my traders, make sure you take full advantage of this offer here from Bitunix. There's a significant deposit reward bonus as well as a $16,000 individual reward for just trading on the exchange. If you use my link to register in the past, you're automatically eligible. If you use my link to register now, you're eligible for all future trading bonuses and competitions. Check out the links down below for more information. All right, folks, go ahead and take a quick look here at Ethereum, kind of just double check some important stuff. When we talked yesterday and the day before, I've been pretty bullish on Ethereum, mainly because there's a significant disparity in liquidation above the price versus that of the actual price action. And more specifically, the liquidation delta is super high. So let me explain what I mean by that. First of all, we've broken through our points of control here, basically our open interest ranges at about 45.50. That allowed for the price to continue to run, mainly because, once more, we have more people taking longs than shorts, or more longs in the market versus shorts, and there's this tremendous amount of liquidation above the price, upwards of 5,000. So liquidation can be helpful, a good tool to kind of help us understand how much higher the price could potentially go, because there's too many people shorting this coin in a bullish uptrend, and that doesn't make any sense. So try not to short too much right now. Granted, again, I know it seems hypercritical because we opened some shorts here recently in the last week's worth of trading. I've probably had about 4 shorts. All of them hit profit targets, but the main reason why is because we kept our margins tight. Okay, so please try not to be a ridiculous, short seller and try to just short everything because you feel like you're overextended. That doesn't really help too much, and it's a bad trading technique. Okay, so take a look here. The thing to recognize, and this is just kind of a quick little bumper sticker version, is just simply put, we were pretty overextended here with an 8 on TD sequential, and that basically just implies that we are more likely to pull back in the relative near future for a short period of time. And what I mean by that is the price doesn't end up pulling back here soon. It'll be probably once we hit the territory of the previous high, which is at 47.50 mark. We're not too far from it. So I'm expecting us to see some kind of cup and handle potential where the price action actually flags out and starts to retrace to this lower high, lower low pattern, and then pivots off a local support range, which could be that 44.50 mark. All right, so I've got my target set at 44.50, kind of just generally, I'm thinking out loud here. That would be an awesome place to consider a long. We may not see that though. Okay, that's more of a liberal retracement. All that being said, the daily time frame is still looking very bullish, as not much has changed here from yesterday, except that the MFI is starting to increase, which is extremely important. We have more money flowing into this coin, and it's not construed as overbought yet. All right, and that's a good sign. So ultimately, that's where continuation patterns happen the most. We look at the 4-hour time frame too. Can recognize that we are pretty solid here above all moving averages. We're over 50 on the RSI and now over 70 rather. So honestly, until this starts to taper off, there's no reason to consider shorting. So the simple way to understand it is usually I use the 70 on the RSI as like a rule of thumb of where I should consider taking profit. In other words, if you're in a long position right now, hold it open until that passes down below 70, because 9 times out of 10, when you sell before 70 on the RSI, you're robbing yourself of a lot of profit. So I think there's still more meat left on the bone here for Ethereum at this point. Do I want to take a long right now leading into a potential resistance zone? Not really. But if I had a long position open right now, I'd be very happy to leave it open a little bit longer, if that makes any sense. Once more, try not to short against this, even though we could very well pull back here. There's no guarantee. It was going to require Bitcoin to start running towards 124 or lower to see Ethereum really pull back. Okay. And I don't know if Bitcoin has it in it just yet, especially with us being in this all-time high territory. Okay. So crazy stuff's happening right now. Be very, very careful shorting any coin right now. All right, jumping into Solana, let's go ahead and double check some important stuff here in the back end with open interest ranges, because we talked previously about this area here at 235, 236 being a heavy amount of confluence. It's not just previous support level turned resistance. It's a area of open interest that has a tendency of holding as a resistance level for us. Now you got to keep in mind we are likely to break this level though because of how Bitcoin's performing. So try not to get it in your head that 236 the price is going to drop instantly because we're in that range. That's worked as a resistance, but we've retested it multiple times now, and the more often you test something, the more likely it is to break. Okay, we have more longs than shorts in the market right now at 1.5 billion for Solana, and we can see here. Let's actually double check. Let's look into the 7 days rather, because we can see from the macro perspective that 240 is that area of liquidation. So we could very well see a sweep of 237 and 242. Okay, so that's a distinct probability. I think 242, just as we're going to see maybe that 4,900 for Ethereum, it's that next level of retracement where the price will come up to sweep those late shorts. All right, so be very careful shorting this coin. You're going to be joining a sea of red here soon if you are not careful. So do not recommend shorting this coin based on that metric, especially since Bitcoin is doing well. Now, what we want to look at is the daily time frame and understand that we are still overextended, but we've actually been consolidating in this range for about 2 or 3 days. So that's a very good sign that provides more potency for a continuation higher for this coin. So I think there's more likelihood for Solana to continue to run because of that, but everything looks really solid on the daily time frame. And if we look at the 4-hour time frame, there's really nothing here that's telling us we're going to pull back. We've got like a double MACD convergence, a double stochastic swing to the upside. There's a lot of momentum here, and the price action is looking very strong. So do not short this coin. If you're gonna insist on shorting, consider a short at the local high, right? In other words, this high here at about 248, that would be a consideration to short, because generally speaking, the first time you retest that high territory, the more likely it is to pull back. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at there in this regard. Solana's looking fantastic, absolutely awesome right now. Just before we take a look at the next altcoin, I want to recommend you consider trading with Bitunix. If you use my link to register down below or have in the past, you'll always be eligible for future trading competitions, but this one is awesome. It's probably the best one I've seen yet, with a full-on $16,000 individual prize pool, as well as a collective prize pool as well for the top 30 traders. Be sure to check out the link down below for more information. All right, let's move on to SUI, see kind of what's going on here with SUI, and double checking SUI, the backend data. This is one that I hesitated to take along with yesterday. Obviously, hindsight's 2020, and we're breaking through that resistance of 360 on the daily, but the concept remains the same here. We have open interest at 360. That's going to be a potential support level for us if Bitcoin can continue to pull back, or more importantly, just retrace in its current area. The reason why I don't like to take along with SUI is because every time Bitcoin pulled back yesterday, SUI was pulling back 2x of it. All right, so it's a highly volatile coin, so make sure you use good risk tolerance and don't go too crazy with leverage on this coin because it moves fast, right? All that being said, I know that's kind of redundant. We probably already know that by now, but the concept here is that liquidation delta is quite high, so we're looking good there, and we have a lot more liquidation above the price than below. This is the monthly, keep that in mind. We could see upwards of $4 as a super heavy concentration there, but if we look at the last 7 days, we can kind of see that anyone shorting this coin at 370 just got destroyed. I mean, look at that. That is probably about $500 million in liquidation at 372. There's further liquidation upwards of 390 here locally. So I'd say 390 is a more distinct probability for this coin for a continuation higher. So we're looking at 390 for SUI, Solana 245, and then Ethereum is at $4,900 range. And once more, potentially 130 to 135 for Bitcoin based on fib over extensions. Okay, so those are just kind of some areas to think about. We look at the daily time frame. this coin does have a pretty significant bullish type of flag pattern. And as I mentioned yesterday, now that we're consolidating above our halfway point here in this retracement with our point of control at 345, the distinct probability here is the price goes higher, right? So that's the obvious concept. Now, it's easy to say in hindsight's 2020, of course, but on the same accord, a lot of these signs have been here for a little while, right? We've been maintaining above that range, that halfway point. We've talked about that for 3 or 4 days. Now, all that being said, we look at the 50 on the RSI, we're now above that level. Stochastic swinging up here. MACD and money flow index is above the price action. These are super, super solid signs for long positions. So once more, I prefer to wait for the price to pull back a little bit before I take a long, but this coin does look like it wants to take off. It's going to require Bitcoin to kind of maintain its range though. Once more, you got to recognize that this coin does pull back pretty hard when it does, and it has relatively, or at least in the relative recent past, we've seen a 2x of Bitcoin to the downside. So expect the price to pull back hard if Bitcoin does, but if Bitcoin can just stay at the 125K range or higher, the SUI is going to take off. This coin is definitely ready and poised to do that. We're above all moving averages. Mainly, everything looks phenomenal. The super important thing here is money flow index being above the RSI. That means there's a lot more money flowing into this coin and is not construed as overbought. That's a very, very solid sign, good indication to consider a long position. Okay, so if you do take a long though, just keep in mind the price could pull back for this coin at any given time because Bitcoin is it's in a really weird place right now. Okay, so I don't like trading breakouts like this, mainly because they're so euphoric and they don't make a lot of sense from a technical standpoint that I generally like to wait on the sidelines for something like this. Okay, so if we get some pullbacks in some of these altcoins here today, I'll be interested in taking a long, but it really depends on how Bitcoin performs first. Taking a look here at XRP. This is a tricky one here because we're kind of stuck on stupid at this 303 range. Now that's our massive area of control here based on volume. And if we look at the liquidation, we just now barely broke even, right? So we've shifted from bearish to bullish. So it does imply a breakout is on the horizon, okay? And generally speaking, when you look at that and you combine that with more liquidation above the price, the likelihood of further upside is greater. So we could very well see a breakout for XRP just based on the back end data here. So let's take a quick look, first of all, at the last 7 days before we move on to the charts and just kind of understand where we're at. Because when we look at the liquidation in the local time frame here, there's a little bit left upwards of 310 to 315, and we are closer to it. So more propensity for a push or a pump higher. However, you got to recognize there's a tremendous amount of liquidation at 293 to 287. We talked about that yesterday being a potential reality. If Bitcoin does pull back, XRP would be one of the first ones to do so as well. You got to recognize that XRP is moving, it's moving less strong to Bitcoin on the way up and more weak to the downside on the way down. Okay, so let's do this here. Let's go ahead and check this chart here. I got a comparison tool on the right-hand side. This is going to be XRP, and the left-hand side is Bitcoin. So if you look at Bitcoin's price action and you look at XRP's price action, this is the 4-hour time frame on both. What looks off to you here? Is there something off about this? Yes, there is. What it is the fact that Bitcoin and majority of other altcoins are establishing higher highs and higher lows, and XRP is not, right? This is Ethereum, for example. This is Solana, for example. And this is also SUI or SUI, right? So for the most part, this coin is not looking super strong and has more propensity to pull back because we're still establishing lower highs versus Bitcoin, okay? So if you see this here, right, you see lower highs for Bitcoin, lower highs for XRP and higher highs for Bitcoin. What do you think is going to happen when Bitcoin starts establishing lower highs and lower lows? We're probably going to see a bit of a correction to sweep that lower area of liquidation. So I'm not super bullish on XRP, just mainly because of that factor. It's a poor pairing versus Bitcoin. And those are things you want to try to identify in most cases. Now, hypothetically, the price could go to the moon tomorrow because some crazy fundamental catalyst occurs. But outside of all that, there's no reason for us to expect this coin is just going to take off. Now, you got to understand also there's this euphoric type of thing that's going on right now too, with Bitcoin being at all-time high. There's a strong chance that people are going to say, shut up and take my money, and the price is going to go up because of that. But just know market makers, they really, really love selling and taking profits in this coin. Every time it tries to establish a higher high and a higher low, it gets stunned out. Okay, so we're right there at a point of control at 303. And if we look at the general structure here on the 4-hour time frame, let's look at that next, because the daily time frame is still bullish, by the way. The 4-hour, we're starting to see I wouldn't say slight divergences, but we're certainly not seeing a super significant strength or continuation. Now, we do have the money flow index above the RSI and MACD and stochastic both swinging up. So there's more propensity for further upside. So please understand that when I say that I don't love how this coin's price action is looking, it's mainly because of how poorly it's paired with Bitcoin, not because we don't have a significant amount of continuation potential, because we do. There's still some good stuff here. But for the most part, if I was a gambling person and I was to say that Bitcoin should pull back, XRP will pull back too with it, right? That's kind of the concept. But from a larger perspective, macro, and also here more locally, this price structure here isn't terrible. Breaking our descending trend lines is extremely important, and I do think further upside makes sense to 310 to 315. Just note, if Bitcoin were to pull back right now, XRP will pull back pretty consistent with it. That's the concept, okay? So it's generally still bullish on this coin from the macro perspective. I just don't love how it's performing versus Bitcoin. And those are things that usually factor in when I try to take trades. So if this data here wasn't so promising, I would be more likely or inclined to want to take a short with this coin. Instead, I'll probably wait until we see 310 to 315 to consider a short. All right, that's the concept. Between now and then, if you're going to FOMO into a long, just make sure you use good risk tolerance, don't over leverage, and don't use too high a position size, because right now things are a little bit on the wonky side. I really don't like trading emotionally. Or I don't trade emotionally, rather, but I specifically don't like trading emotional scenarios, which is what all-time high territory does, right? For the most part, though, you're going to find a lot more success taking longs and shorts. Be sure that you stick with the trend until it breaks, right? All right, folks, thanks again so much for being an awesome part of my life. Hope you're having a fantastic and wonderful rest of your day. Thanks so much again. We'll see you in tomorrow's video. Take care out there.